room 409, which is one of the most haunted suites. And there was a bridal party in there. It's super popular for weddings, if you can believe that.
That's fun.
Yeah. And so the bride actually caught the tail end of the ghost tour that was going on outside of 409. And she pulled me aside afterwards and said, I might have a story for you. She'd left her phone charging, her smartphone, charging on the table, gone down to the lounge to have lunch, came back. She had 100 missed calls from 911. So of course she calls him back.
Welcome to Creepalachia. We are putting the creep in Creepalachia today. We're talking about some creepy stuff, and I'm so happy to be joined by Adra Johnson, who runs Haunted Blennerhassett, which is full of tours and ghosts and apparitions and serial killers and all kinds of good stuff. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So give me a little background on you, how you ended up, in the line of work you do and all that good stuff.
Oh, sure. Well, I've been interested in the paranormal since I was a kid, but when I came to Blennerhassett Hotel in 2017 for the first time, I was like, this place is really haunted. And they hadn't had any ghost tours or anything before. So I thought it'd be a good place. Parkersburg is super strange as a town, as is. Some places are just more haunted than others. But I decided to do it professionally because the way that it helps historic buildings, the revenue that it brings in, and the interesting level of tourism.
Yep.
So we started these tours just a few years ago, and an already haunted building has become even more active with the attention. So it's just kept growing, really.
Heck yeah. So give me some backstory on the Blennerhassett. What is it for someone who's like, what in the world, that name? I can't say it. What is it?
So Blennerhassett Hotel is tied to Blennerhassett Island. So that's also a super ancient haunted island. It's a state park in West Virginia, actually. Mm-hmm. But it's named for Harmon and Margaret Blennerhassett, two Irish immigrants that ended up being pretty famous in the Burr conspiracy locally. And the original founder of the hotel decided that it would be a good tie to do. But it works out because both places are super haunted. So it ended up working out.
Yeah. I've been there. It's been a few years, but it is a gorgeous place. Mm-hmm. Since you began, how did you first get introduced into sure, I'll run the tour or do whatever? Or how did that come about?
It was interesting because I started professionally ghost hunting, if you want to call it that. Sounds strange to even call it that, in 2019 when I was living in Australia. So COVID put me back home, which ended up kind of feeling like divine intervention. The new owners, Wayne Waldeck and Lee Eric Rector, had just taken over, and they've done everything they can to maintain the historic aspect as well as introduce new things. So I'd been there for a few months. I was effectively back in West Virginia, sort of stuck, I thought, at the time. And after a few months of working front desk there, I was like, this is by far, comparable to Lizzie Borden House, Trans-Allegheny, some of the most haunted places I've ever been. And I thought the stories needed to be told. And I was really interested to dive deeper into it and see what else we could get out of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So are you from Appalachia, or where did you grow up?
I'm from Somersville, yeah.
From Somersville? Okay. So you mentioned Australia. So I'm like, how did you end up in Australia?
Yeah, I'm kind of like a global skipper, if you will. So I've lived in Cornwall, England. I did a journalism course there. And then gaming nerd here. So I had some gaming friends in New Zealand I ended up going to visit. So that's where I lived for 4 years. And at the time COVID hit, I'd recently relocated to Melbourne. And was really inspired by the Melbourne jail, which is connected to the Ned Kelly story, and how they'd kind of repurposed that building, continued to bring in the revenue by ghost tours and other things like that. So that's how I got the idea to get into it professionally. And then when COVID hit, I just decided to come home and wait it out.
Cool. And you mentioned you're an entrepreneur. Is that right? Yeah. So what? Tell me about that.
So I have kind of consolidated everything, including the hotel and other haunted tours, because if I'm traveling or spending time somewhere else, I like to investigate and run events there as well. So I did incorporate that into an LLC, which is M45. So we do all sorts of stuff from ghost tours, paranormal events, sometimes just themed events, historical, even astronomy, music. It's kind of like a catch-all. But it's always on the stranger side, that's for sure.
Very cool. All right. So what's the first story you think we should start with? I know you mentioned you have a few here, and we have some show and tell. We got some clips going on.
We do. Well, I'll tell you what I tell everybody is that the Blennerhassett Hotel is kind of Grand Central Station for the spirits. I mean, the stuff that happens there, the consistency, any time of day, it really is unusual, especially in haunted hotels. You might have one haunted room or one spirit. It's not that way at all, the Blennerhassett. So I would say our most famous spirit, or infamous, if you want to call it that, has been around since the most recent renovation in the 1980s. And he has been referred to for most of the time as the bowler hat man. Pretty ominous.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started these tours, we were having some interactions with guests from this particular spirit. It seemed to be kind of increasing. So I wanted to try and figure out who this guy could be.
Mm-hmm.
I inherited a lot of historical research from Susan Shepard, who has passed on, but she ran Haunted Parkersburg for 30 years. In Parkersburg, she was a medium, astrologist, psychic, and found out that in the 1860s, Parkersburg actually had a serial killer. Not a lot of people know about it. His name was Joseph Isel. He went by John Schaefer. Reason for that being he immigrated from Germany 3 years prior because he was wanted for murder.
Mm-hmm.
Surprise, surprise.
Mm-hmm.
So a few years after he got in Parkersburg, he got started again with the murders, and they were particularly gruesome. He was known as the Hatchet Slayer. Well, it turns out that the first of these murders took place across the street from the hotel, and it was formerly a saloon. It's a government building now. And so I thought like it might be transferring or something like that. The physical description of the bowler hat man fit him exactly. So I thought that might be it. Come to find out from a 1950s article, his apartment actually was on the site where the hotel stands now. And he killed his third victim in his apartment. So we started having things match up, including the physical description of the bowler hat man is just under 6 feet, light eyes, straight nose, certain type of build. And the picture I showed you of him here, this is a drawing, but it's a cover to basically the written confession or autobiography that Isel was permitted to write when he was eventually caught for the benefit of his wife and daughter. So in this manuscript, which you can still get on Amazon today for like $12, he's self-described 5'11", blue-gray eyes, straight nose, exact right type of build. And when I started kind of introducing this information on tours, the sightings of the bowler hat man got more and more frequent until eventually he started responding. So he's one of the most cited ghosts in the hotel today. Seems to like the attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you tell, like, oh, yeah, that's that ghost? How do you tell, how can you tell, like, who's who?
You can't always, to be honest. We're still working on a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's ultimately up to the spirit to self-identify if they wish to do so. In this case, the first tip-off that I got, because I was pretty lost, honestly, I was leading a ghost tour in room 409, which is one of the most haunted suites. And there was a bridal party in there. It's super popular for weddings, if you can believe that.
That's fun.
Yeah. And so the bride actually caught the tail end of the ghost tour that was going on outside of 409.
Uh-huh.
And she pulled me aside afterwards and said, I might have a story for you. She'd left her phone charging, her smartphone, charging on the table, gone down to the lounge to have lunch, came back. She had 100 missed calls from 911. So of course she calls them back. And they said, we're about to send a unit over because we just had breathing hang up multiple times. So it triggered my memory because we had the exact same activity happen during COVID in 2020 from that government building across the street.
Oh, wow.
So that's pretty unique. That's not your EVP or your orb or whatever.
Right.
So the only notable thing that's happened in that building is those murders. And so I thought it was jumping over, and it wasn't until I got a hold of former blueprints of Parkersburg and confirmation from the article that it was the same location, because prior to the hotel being built, that site was a lot of things. It's really central to downtown and the rivers, but it was a bakery with dwelling units or apartments, as you would call them, on top.
Mm-hmm.
And in this article, it mentions that Joseph Isel was a resident on the corner of 4th and Market, bakery with dwelling units on top. And so that mixed with the physical description of the spirit matching his, self-written physical description, and then the increase in activity directly after, he kind of outed himself, to be honest. But since then, we have been able to contact him more frequently. Not sure why he's still hanging around Parkersburg, seeing as he was only there for 4 years. But it's worth noting that he was the last public execution in Wood County. It was a field at the time. It's now the Dills Cemetery. So he was executed there, a crowd of over 5,000 people. And his body is still in that unmarked grave today. He might still have descendants in the area. So that might be why he's still hanging around.
Wow. How many people did he murder? Do we know?
That we know of in Parkersburg, officially 3. But he was wanted for murder out of Germany. He had a period of time where he was in the Pope's army stationed in Rome and then deserted, which was not uncommon for the time. But there was also a weird lull in between the first 2 murders that took place in the month of June, and then he didn't kill again until December. So we don't know whether or not he actually did anything then, but officially in Parkersburg 3, he was caught on the 4th attempted murder.
So for your tour, is he like a mischievous spirit, or, does that make sense? Or like, what kind of attitude does he have?
It's funny you say that, because when he was first sighted in the 80s, people thought it was a poltergeist at first. There was a lot of activity in the basement dry storage that would be similar to that, like sort of a fun house feeling when you walk in the room, or things getting thrown off. And it was only when he started appearing next to that activity that we figured out it was associated to him. But it really fluctuates. He'd said himself in his written confession, which he urged people to remain religious and not, follow down the same path he had, that he'd always sort of had these dark urges. So I think mentally he was in a very dark place, maybe had some issues and whatnot. But the mood is dependent on the day. So his execution was March 16th. And around this time of year, it gets a lot darker than it would be otherwise. But he usually is very active when we're in 409. It's clear he likes the attention. But you never know what version of him you're going to get. It just really depends on the day.
That's fun. Do you have a specific story or place that you take guests to talk about him on the tour, or like, and what happens there?
So I usually start in the basement just talking about it, but 409 seems to be his sort of current dwelling unit. We don't know exactly where his apartment would have been in the building, but he's always hung out there. And we've had just a variety of things. He is really active in manipulating electronics and equipment. We've only had somebody get physically touched once. But when we ran our first paranormal convention a few years ago, that was also the first overnight paranormal investigation that had ever taken place in the building. And it was March 18th. I didn't know at the time the correlation. So that darker energy was present. And so when we got to about 3 o'clock in the morning in 409, it started getting really, really heavy. And we actually, at one point, 6 of us audibly heard, not on an EVP or equipment or anything, like a sort of choking and gargling sound, almost like someone was being hung. And we've just had variety of things happen in that room specifically. But he's known to, if I don't go in there for too long and I choose to go in another room for the ghost tour and do the paranormal investigation there, he'll sometimes interrupt. Really, he does love the attention, which, is a thing for serial killers, I think, some of the time anyway.
Sure. Yeah. Very charismatic. I mean, he had a wife and a kid, so someone could stand him,
Yeah, apparently so. She did remarry not long after. Can't blame her.
Oh, really? Yeah. So how much of a success rate, we'll call it, do you have on contact during these tours? Is it, can you measure it, or is it like every now and then, or?
Well, the way it is with ghost hunting is it's not like you buying a ticket to a movie and the show for sure is going to start at 7. The first time I spent the night in Moundsville Penitentiary, I had absolutely nothing happen. I slept like a baby. Not the same for consequent visits after. But I would say for the Blennerhassett Hotel, one of the reasons I was so interested in starting something there is because if you're going to measure it based on what you would typically get, it is like a 90 to 100% success rate. I have never had a ghost tour where we don't make contact, and they're typically 1 hour long. At most, I'll do investigations 3 to 5 hours. And of course, you're not going to have something happen all the time. People stay there perfectly peaceful just as constantly as things happen. But when you're, say, filming a TV show for ghost hunting or something that's popular like that, generally those investigators will have to spend multiple nights in the same location to get that 30, 40 minutes of footage. Not the case in the Blennerhassett. If you're on an hour-long ghost tour and you really want to make contact, something will come through, which is super rare.
That's fun. So your experience, how many places have you been to? You mentioned Moundsville Penitentiary, which I've wanted to go there, haven't went yet. But where all have you been?
Oh, I mean, everywhere. Like I've been into this since I was a kid anyway. So I always had a thing for going to haunted places. My first, I guess, actual place was Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum when I was 15. That's where I really had my first major encounter. I saw a full-bodied apparition of a patient, as well as got my arm scratched, camera drained. I mean, that lit a fire for sure.
Let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Details. What happened? What was the tour like?
Well, it was crazy. So the building was actually closed at the time, which makes this so much more prominent of an experience. So it was in July for my 15th birthday. Begged my grandmother to take me. She was not wanting to do it. Eventually drove me out there with a camera so I could at least take some pictures. And when I got up there, we had kind of split. She was walking a separate way. I was standing right in front of the building. There was a chain link fence and I was trying to take photos. When I saw this man walking around from the left side of the building, and I don't know how else to describe him except just like a scraggly older man. He looked like he was in some sort of cloth uniform or the equivalent. He had long gray hair. He had a few missing teeth. And he was just walking the side of the building, grinning at me the whole time, and then walked inside. So at the time, I'm thinking, well, that's a caretaker, an employee, somebody, maybe that was working at the insane asylum. Come to find out later on, nobody had been there that day. Around the same time that he was sighted, so just directly after, the camera battery I had totally drained without explanation, which is a common and frustrating occurrence in ghost hunting. So if you want to get into it, always bring extra batteries. And then I dropped, so I gave up taking pictures. At that point, was ready to go. Dropped the car keys just right behind the chain link. When I went to go get them, my arm was scratched. It was crazy. So I've still not spent the night in there, but it's on the list. I just kind of steel myself for that one.
Yeah. I had Copperhead, who's been there for doing tours there for 9 years. So many good stories came from that. And you go to that town and you see this place and you're like, why is this here?
Right.
It's just like this amazing structure, not in the middle of nowhere, but rural West Virginia. So that's part of the fun too.
Yeah. You're not expecting it if you don't know it's there, and it's domineering for the whole town. But I've been to Moundsville 3 times now. I will say in my following visits to Moundsville, I did have a lot of activity happen, particularly in the chapel out back. I was in there alone. There was a file cabinet that flew open for no reason. There was actually the second investigation, I think, compensated for the first one, because that's the only investigation to this day I've ever left early because of how lethargic I was feeling. And
wow.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And of course, they've got that ancient mound just right across the street. So that's definitely one of the more active places. Fun fact, too, the same architect that designed Parkersburg High School. So there is a little bit of a tie.
No way.
Yeah. And they say that high school's haunted, too. There is a cemetery right behind it where the founder of the Blennerhassett is buried as well.
Yeah.
But I've been all around West Virginia. The Lizzie Borden house I mentioned is one of my favorite locations. She and I share a birthday. So
is it in West Virginia?
No, it's in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I thought
I had
so.
to think for a minute.
Yeah. I'm going to Salem in May.
Oh, so fun. And it's good you're doing it during the off season.
Yeah, that's kind of what we wanted to do, because I was watching these walk around tour videos during like Halloween, and crazy. I love people, but not really.
Same. Which is why I do what I do, right?
Right. So yeah, I was like, man, it's like shoulder to shoulder there. But we found it's actually one of the most haunted Airbnbs in the nation.
So cool.
I'll have to look it up and tell you the exact name. But yeah, I was like, hey, that's a perfect place for a team retreat.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna bring the spirit box or whatever it's called, and that does it goes between the radio stations.
Yeah, the white noise.
Yeah. So we're gonna do all that.
That's so fun. Yeah, being in Salem during October is like being in New Orleans for Mardi Gras. You got to really like people.
Yeah. Have you went?
To Salem? Yeah, it's just about an hour from Fall River, which is where the Lizzie Borden house is. I haven't got to spend as much time there as I would like.
I want to go and see the memorials and the grave sites, and there's like a museum there of hell or some kind of like a Church of Satan museum.
Real uplifting stuff.
Yeah. Motivating. Some people on the team were like, I'm probably not going to go to that one. I was like, I totally don't blame you, but.
Yeah, there's plenty to do. And the thing is, too, people that are drawn to this kind of stuff have congregated there. So you can absolutely bet you're going to find something.
Sure. And I just like exploring and learning. And, I feel like, well, I won't get possessed if I have good intentions.
Yeah.
So
if you're not fearful of it, you're a million times more safe.
Right.
Anyways. So I always tell that to people, if you're feeling scared in an investigation or really put off, you should probably step outside and get some air and maybe go do something else for the night. You don't want to make yourself vulnerable like that. Yeah.
So what kind of gear do I need if I want to become a ghost hunter? Is there a certain basic list of like, okay, well, this, and this, or do you just grab a phone and, pick a spot, or like you mentioned having your batteries charged and things like that?
Yeah. That has been a frustrating part of ghost hunting because you always want to document. That's something I've got more recently into. I am technologically challenged for my career path. But really they can drain the batteries at any point, or, you can take a picture and it just be blank depending, but really you can go in with, I like taking in actually like digital cameras or disposable cameras, because that way there's no Photoshop allegations, but your phone will work just as well for EVPs and photos.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going past that, there's a plethora of stuff that you can do. On a more basic level, EMF detectors, you have to be aware, though, that those will go off for your phone and outlets and things of the like.
Mm-hmm.
The spirit box, like you mentioned, so that uses white noise to go between radio frequencies. And occasionally it will have pieces of radio come through, but you will be able to tell what is a deliberate response to a question that you're asking.
Mm-hmm.
So they're able to do that. A laser grid's a good one. So it kind of looks like a flashlight. And if you are in an area that has alleged shadow movement or a lot of just apparitions in general, this is something that you can set up in a dark room against a wall, and you're able to detect when movement is coming through and manipulating that light.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah. So it turns the room into like an Atari.
Yeah. It's kind of it's kind of like that star projector that you see around Christmas is what it looks like. But it is really good. We have a lot of success with this device in the Blennerhassett laundry room in particular, because the laundry room today is where it was in the 1800s. So it's not been moved around. And there is a closed up wall that used to be the staff staircase at the ends of the washer and dryers. And there's constant shadow movement through there. So during investigations, we'll set that up in the laundry room, and we're able to detect when those shadows come through.
Wow. Have you saw stuff moving through this?
Yeah.
It just looks like the light kind of, some kind of apparition walks through the room.
Yeah. If a shadow is being cast or something is interrupting the light that's not a human being or something explainable, if you're in a room or a basement or somewhere where there's no cars driving by, there's nothing else that could manipulate that light. That is a really good way to just instantly rule out anything else that it could be. And we have had that happen quite a bit. So if you hear that there's shadow figures, it's a great thing to set up.
Hey, all right. All right. So story number 2, what are we thinking here? What do you suggest?
So many. So I guess I should mention the man behind the Blennerhassett Hotel, William Nelson Chancellor. So the hotel was built in 1889, post-Civil War, for basically as a luxury location for the oil and gas businessmen. Parkersburg and Marietta experienced a huge boom in that just directly after the Civil War. And so he built it as a place for those people to go. Shipbuilding was also very popular in the area at the time. And there were 2 or 3 active theaters in the area. So the vaudeville actors and actresses would come stay at the Blennerhassett. Just to give you an idea of how luxurious it was, Parkersburg got electricity in 1888. Blennerhassett Hotel opened in 1889 with electricity and an electric elevator, which was basically unheard of.
Ballin'.
Yeah, no kidding. Way to flex.
Yeah.
But this was the man behind it, and he was really ahead of his time. He's not just the Blennerhassett Hotel founder. He served as mayor of Parkersburg twice. He was a self-made businessman. He built other places downtown, like the Chancellor Hotel, which unfortunately is no longer there, Trinity Church. But he was the one that had the foresight to call it the Blennerhassett Hotel. Originally, it was going to be called Hotel Argyle. And at the time, Blennerhassett Island was just farmland. It was not the tourist spot that it is today. He had the foresight to say, it's going to be a tourist location one day, and we need to go ahead and take that name so we can associate ourselves with it. To this day, we do Blennerhassett Island packages. Everybody associates the two. His house is still in the Julia Ann Historic District, which is a stop on the Haunted Parkersburg walking tour. And it's still in the family to this day. So it's kind of like a living museum. But interestingly enough, of course, he is one of the most cited ghosts in the hotel as well. And so we have one of 3 original commissioned portraits of him located in the hotel. Seems to be sort of a trigger object, which is an inanimate object that triggers paranormal activity, usually something personal to the spirit or from the time frame, which in this case, it's both. And so this portrait has been moved around the hotel in various locations, but there has been sightings of cigar smoke just around it, which he was known to partake in cigars. It's actually been photographed as well. It will occasionally show up on tours if we're talking about him, and it's sort of this smoky, sweet, spicy vanilla smell. So that will appear sometimes. Susan Shepard, when she would start her tours in the hotel, had it photographed beside her at one point, and it sort of follows you around. But then he's also sighted on the 2nd floor, which in the 1800s didn't have any rooms except for his preferred room. It was the social area. So we're talking bar, restaurant, grand piano, and the like. And he will either appear as a tall sort of black shadow, similar to his height, or he actually will appear in that sort of black suit and monocle that he's in that portrait. And people have reported him either sitting on the edge of their beds or walking around smoking, or just seemed to be observing. He was a very successful, serious man. But the interesting part is most people, even locally, are not going to know who the founder of the hotel is, unless you're a big history nerd like me. But they will come down and see this portrait of him and say, that's the guy we saw. So if you're on the 2nd floor, you might have a run-in with the real owner.
That's awesome. And this is this picture we're looking at. Where is it located in the?
So it's in the lobby today. And that is one of 3 original commissioned portraits of Mr. Chancellor, generously on loan from his descendants today. So there are 2 others of those, but that one has been in the hotel for quite some time. It's moved locations. But it is perfect likeness of Mr. Chancellor, and it seems to be something that he might still be attached to.
It kind of looks like Bruce Willis.
Yeah, it kind of does.
A little bit. So have you saw him?
So I was starting to think it was
bullshit.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know what I can say on the air. Yeah, I was starting to think
that one.
I was starting to think it was a bollocks.
Right.
That he was still around in the hotel, and because he had just not made himself present to me at any point. And so come to find out, he's just picky. So I did have an instance where I was working front desk one time, and I walked past his portrait, and it was a really dead day at the hotel. We had basically nobody in there at that time. It was around lunchtime, and I caught a whiff of that cigar smoke for the first time. And so, not even believing it, I go back to the kitchen to see if they're experimenting in their boredom. They were not. When I came back, it was totally gone. So that was my first, I guess you could call it, encounter. But interestingly enough, I formerly ran investigations at the hotel with Mr. Scott Worley. He did Haunted Beckley, so he's passed away recently, but he and I were very close colleagues. And he ran Haunted Beckley for years. He was also a well-respected banker for years, very similar to Mr. Chancellor. And so the first time I brought Scott on an investigation at the hotel, here Mr. Chancellor comes to appear. I got a little bit offended then.
That's awesome.
Since then, we do have the cigar smoke here and again on the tours. But honestly, he's not frequent for me, but I can say that I have experienced him, and I've definitely witnessed other people have interactions with him.
Heck yes. Tell me, you mentioned Haunted Parkersburg in passing, and you mentioned Susan Shepard, which unfortunately passed away.
Right.
Tell me about Haunted Parkersburg. What is that?
Haunted Parkersburg is Susan Shepard's sort of legacy, if you will, although she was the epitome of a Renaissance woman. I mean, an artist, a great artist, a writer, several published books, a very gifted medium and psychic, astrologist. She had personal connections to the Mothman story, as well as connections to Native American blood, things of that nature. So this has been continued by Roger Shepard and her daughter, Scarlett Shepard. I was fortunate enough to be asked to be one of the tour guides continuing. But she did so much more, having value to these ghost tours, not just being something for entertainment, but something that has been historically vetted, which is a very valuable thing in the paranormal because you want to be taken seriously. And she made sure of that. So we continue to do these walking tours every September and October publicly. We do private tours throughout the year. And they go through the downtown area as well as part of the historic district. She really was so instrumental in solidifying that reputation in Parkersburg, even when it wasn't always popular. And when I was asked to do these tours, I inherited a lot of her research as well and a lot of her documentation that allowed me to confirm things that were going on at the hotel and other locations that simply I wouldn't have had otherwise. She probably would have saved me 2 years of research on that. So those still do go on. She is well known. She was especially connected to, like I said, the Mothman story and Indrid Cold, who is the famous UFO man that is connected with Mothman. Not very many people know that he was sighted in Parkersburg first. So they just connect it to Point Pleasant, which is not far. It's less than an hour away. But the first interaction with Indrid Cold took place in Parkersburg.
What is that a good story, or is it like kind of that's basically it?
No, I think it's a great story. I'll give you, a bit of the lowdown on it. So
Sure.
it was prior, of course, to the first Mothman sighting that officially took place in Point Pleasant. So November 2nd, 1966, a man by the name of Woodrow Derenberger, he was a salesman and he was driving back from Marietta towards Mineral Wells. And it was a super dark night. He was pretty much alone on the highway for that time being. He described being cut off by a flying saucer, but it wasn't a saucer. It was shaped like one of those old gas lamps, and it was on its side. So he had this thing completely cut him off right on the corner of 77 and 47, still there today. And he described this man coming out of the craft, approaching him on his passenger side window. And he said that the man had asked him to roll the window down. So he did. But when he got to the window and continued talking to Woodrow, he realized that the guy was not moving his lips at all. He was just grinning. Kind of uncanny valley, if you will. Like the guy had read up on what is considered nice on Earth and was trying to recreate that.
Sounds like a Tool video.
Yeah, no kidding. Ramstein or something.
Yeah. Yep.
So they continue to have just a brief conversation. Woodrow was incredibly frightened of this guy, even though he looked totally normal, aside from the grinning and telepathy. But he had asked what the lights in the distance were, asked about Parkersburg, asked his name, where he lived, offered very little in terms of what he was there for, just kept saying not to be afraid. But this was a figure that was reoccurring in the Mothman story when it happened later on.
Isn't there a recorded interview with this dude?
There is. He went to WTAP, which is still the news station here in Parkersburg, the next day to do an interview. And that's it, just down there.
This one right here?
Yeah, it hasn't got the footage, but it's got the audio of it.
Oh, cool.
He was scared out of his mind.
Yeah, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and turn some... Let's listen a little bit of this.
Yeah, sounds good.
Whether you believe in what you hear or see on this program is not the point. We are here to talk to a man that allegedly did make contact with such an object within the Parkersburg area last evening, November the 2nd, 1966, at approximately 7:25 p.m. The incident allegedly took place on Interstate Highway 77 near the interchange of route number 47. This gentleman is a salesman in the area. He has been a resident of the area for the past 50 years, and he has given us permission to interview him, to show his face, and to call him by name. This in itself takes a lot of initiative, and to be very plain,
If you go forward a little bit.
In
front of my truck, turning crosswise.
Yeah.
And when it turned crosswise, it slowed down. It started slowing, not abruptly or too fast, but it gave me plenty of time to step on my brakes and slow down with it. But it forced me to come to a complete stop. As soon as I had stopped, there was a door opened in the side of this vehicle, and this man stepped out and came directly to me, or came to the truck. He walked to the right-hand side of the truck, and he told me to roll down the window. He asked me to roll down the window on my right-hand side of my truck. And I'd done what he asked. And this man stood there, and he first asked me what I was called. And I knew he meant my name, and I told him my name. And he asked me, he said, why are you frightened? He said, don't be frightened, we wish you no harm. He said, we mean you no harm, we wish you only happiness. And I told him my name, and when I told him my name, he said he was called Cold. That was the name that he was called by. And he asked me what the city of Parkersburg, he pointed to the lights, he didn't point, but he gave the impression that he was pointing, and he asked me what that was called. And I told him it was Parkersburg, it was a city, a town, and he asked me if most all the people lived in this city or town.
Sounds like a good old dude.
No kidding. And it's interesting because Mr. Derenberger still has descendants in the area today, and he really had nothing to gain from this. He had a really normal life. He was apprehensive to be public about this encounter. There did end up being repercussions personally for him for it as well. Even today, when paranormal tourism is getting more popular in West Virginia and worldwide, it's still not totally socially accepted.
It's the devil.
Yeah, no kidding. I can tell you how many times I've heard that. But even more so in the 60s.
Right.
So kind of like similar to the residents of Point Pleasant, who are halfway in agony about these encounters, going to their pastors, going to their friends looking for advice. They really didn't want it to happen. It was very similar for him. But it's interesting that this happened prior to the Mothman sightings, and Indrid Cold ended up being so connected to that story.
Yeah, and everyone who's listening out there, shout out to Mr. Bad Seed 1976 on YouTube. The video is called The Man Called Cold, the Woodrow Derenberger or Berger.
Derenberger, from what I understand.
Derenberger interview. It's about 30 minutes long. Highly recommend.
It's a good interview.
All right. So we kind of tangented it away from a little bit, but that's still Parkersburg. What's the, so we got a third story, and then we got a few clips to show after that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. So the hotel in general, Blennerhassett Hotel, is widespread, very haunted. You never know what's going to happen there at any point of day. Like I said before, somebody could have an individual experience in one room, never to be repeated again. But there are certain rooms that seem to have a little more consistent action, if you will. So we generally tell people that are really gunning for a haunted experience, you want to go to the second or the fourth floor. Told you about 409. We'll jump to the second floor. So aside from Mr. Chancellor, one of the more haunted rooms is room 211, the Blennerhassett suite. It's known to be kind of the honeymoon suite, which is fitting for ghosts, I guess. But
beautiful.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it'd be perfect for me, but I don't know about everybody else. But we seem to have a variety of experiences in there from, there's a woman in white there from a suicide that happened in the early 2000s. So she is frequently contacted in there. As well as we have sightings of a riverboat captain, which tracks with Marietta and Parkersburg being so instrumental in the shipbuilding. We actually have another spirit locally in Parkersburg, Captain George Deming, who was a descendant of Miles Standish, founder of the Plymouth colony. And he moved to Parkersburg for the oil and gas and shipbuilding, stuff like that. So it wouldn't be off the mark that somebody would have been in the Blennerhassett. And interestingly enough, in room 211, when we have activity, we have certain devices like EMF detectors and REM pods, which I don't think I've mentioned before, but it's more of a paranormal friendly EMF detector. So it can't really be manipulated by your cell phone or anything like that. And these devices will go off in tandem like they're doing some sort of message or code, which would be aligned with somebody that's at sea and using that method of communication. So that's something that happens quite a bit, even happens with flashlights. And it's something that consistently happens without explanation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand Morse code, but if anybody does, that would be amazing.
And we have, is that the video we're setting up here?
That one
REM
there.
pod. So
Ignore my talking. I was mid-tour.
oh, hey, I need to go on this tour. How many?
Yes.
And before I play this video, how many tours do you give a year, would you say?
So they're public tours, 7 to 8 p.m. on the third Friday of every month. Then we do once every 3 months, 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. paranormal investigations. Once a year, we will do the Appalachian Paracon, in which we will do an all-night investigation. So for 2025, that's on October 18th. There's a day convention, then an overnight. But I'll also take private tours or anything. I'm always excited for people to see this location and really get into the experience.
So someone can contact you and be like, "I want a private tour," and you'll be like, "Okay, well, here's the time, here's the date, here's the cost."
Yeah, if I'm around and I can work it out, 100% of the time, I want people to see what's going on in this building.
That's awesome. So I'm going to play this video in its entirety. It's about 44 seconds long. You will hear Adra talking.
Sorry.
Oh, that's perfect.
We did have very similar activity happen the last time I brought the REM pod in here. And then it said light up on the spirit box. And this went on for like a good 20 minutes. So if this keeps up, we might shut this off and get some other activity going. What did it just say? I don't know.
I think the first one was okay.
Wow.
Oh, they got another one.
Look at that. Yeah, so you see it doing the same message on two different devices.
Ooh.
And so the other person you see there putting down that second REM pod, that's Patience LeClaire, and she's a longtime guide at Fairfield County Infirmary in Ohio, another well-known haunted location. So
come on over. We need to have a chat.
Yeah, no kidding. To have these two devices doing that in tandem, and to also have other paranormal professionals coming in with no explanation as to why this is happening, it seems like some sort of message is being conveyed.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, and kind of describe for the audio crowd. So we have two REM pods, and they look like, I don't know, a can of like soup,
Yeah,
but they have lights on the top, and then they have an antenna coming off the top of it, and they have red and green lights, and the different beeps.
Yeah.
Or, when each light beeps, they also have a sound attached to them.
So the idea of the REM pod is to harness what the EMF detector does without as much outside influence. Because the EMF detectors are really for electricians and stuff like that, or to see if there's live wires in a building. The REM pods have been designed specifically for paranormal investigation and have done their best to omit any outside influence. So the idea of it is, you have this little pod with the antenna that can generate electromagnetic frequency as well as detect it if it's within a physical distance. So the idea is that if somebody is physically touching it, it will go off. And these videos are so fascinating to me because red and green are not the only lights on that device. It goes to yellow, blue, purple. And there's other situations where you might be investigating that you see it do a sudden spike or go up to other colors and things like that. But in order for these two to be going off the way that they are, it's almost like somebody is having to touch them, kind of like a message board or something similar.
Right.
But those are designed specifically for ghost hunting. So they're a little more reliable than your EMF detectors.
Mm-hmm.
But you just have to, have some discernment with it. Know, hey, if I'm next to an outlet and it's going off, might not be anything. But if it's been dead silent on the green for however long, and it suddenly spikes while we're having activity, then that's just more proof.
Yeah. Your fascination with the dead, when did this start? Like, were you like, oh, you know what? I bet ghosts are a thing. Or was there this monumental occurrence in your life where you were like, you know what? I'm pretty sure this is real, so I'm going to look into it.
I've been seeing stuff since I was a kid, and I didn't understand for years that I was actually seeing that kind of stuff. So I don't know if you want to call it positive or negative, but I have a level of mediumship as well where I'm able to like see people that have passed on. And so I was experiencing that from 3 or 4 years of age. And then as I got older, around like 14, 15, I started personally exploring it a little bit more. And the more I've gotten into it, the more strength it's garnered, to be honest. But it's fascinating for me not only to tell the stories of these people in historical buildings, but everybody that has these abilities gets them differently or gets the messages differently. So the way it works for me really is like if you're reading a book and you're seeing it in your head, that's the way that I can kind of see. I'll see whoever is physically in the room, and then I can also see somebody else like detailed as can be. So I didn't really realize until I got into this professionally that when I was describing those people, it would match up with who had actually been in the building. The information that I was receiving in terms of names, age, etc., was actually accurate. So that has definitely garnered personal interest for me, just being able to help tell these stories. But it's an interesting brand of tourism. It's a way for people to get in that aren't necessarily interested in traditional history to kind of learn about that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Has it kind of helped you with your theories of what happens when we die? Or, I mean, we don't have to get too deep, but I'm just curious because I think if I saw something like that, I would kind of firmly know like, okay, well, there's something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I find the human consciousness so fascinating at its core anyways. So I'm always open to adapting beliefs and learning more as you go on. And a lot of that has happened through this. So I'm still not 100% sure there, but I will say the human mind is something really incredible. And I don't necessarily think the same thing happens for everybody because there are 1800s mansions I've stayed the night in that are totally not haunted at all, not a ghost in sight. There are people I've attempted to contact on the other side that cannot be contacted for one reason or another. So it's still kind of wishy-washy, but that's exciting. I feel like I would probably be bored if I knew everything that happened. And I can understand why people would not believe if they hadn't had these types of experiences. But in my case, I've gotten information on people and historical locations and other things like that are not able to be found in books all the time or articles, or would have taken me years to dig out. And I get that directly from whatever's communicating from the other side. So it definitely has the assurance that some people do hang around for a little bit longer. And I think time doesn't work the same way on the other side. So if you're contacting someone, it doesn't mean that they're always going to be there. But for that time period they are and have unfinished business or whatever it might be. But there's definitely something to be contacted.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of these paranormal places are centered around old structures. Are there any experiences you've had with newer places, or have you ever just been in like McDonald's and you're like, oh, yeah, someone else is holding that Big Mac. I'm not sure what's going on. You know what I mean?
Oh, not that one specifically, but I'd be interested to have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There's actually a woman who's a good friend of Haunted Parkersburg, and she lives in one of the older houses on Avery Street. Allegedly very, haunted. It's right by Quincy Hill, which is another haunted location. And she said that she never saw anything until she saw one gentleman who looked like he was from the late 2000s. And that has happened time and again where you see modern spirits or, you can contact somebody who has recently passed. It really just depends. But you have to keep in mind as well, even at your average McDonald's, this planet is so old. You never know what was there before the McDonald's.
Odds are there's some kind of burial ground, whether it was for, dinosaurs or, some kind of spiritual burial place, which is pretty regular in Appalachia.
Exactly.
Yeah, because like people would die and you'd have to bury them right there. Like you can't just go over the mountain and find a different spot. So they're just everywhere.
Exactly.
These old graveyards.
I mean, the planet is ancient. So we definitely have a higher influx of that here in Appalachia. It is one of the oldest parts of the world, which is why I think it is known to be so strange and mysterious as people worldwide know it to be. So you never know what's there. And I mean, maybe somebody that died just loved McDonald's, but 99% of the time.
They're like, man, my spirit really loved Big Macs.
And you know what? Life is worth living.
Heck yeah, that's what I'm saying. You know, screw this dieting stuff.
Yeah.
So, well, on that too, do you feel like these are more of spirits hanging around, or do you think they're like physical apparitions, or what's the because when you go anywhere, you can have a feeling about someone. Like you can look at someone and your senses, sometimes wrongly, will tell you something about them. Like, oh, well, that person seems to be a problem. I'm going to kind of stick away from them. Or this person seems really genuine, which this kind of inclinations get us in trouble. But I feel like that energy sticks around. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. And yeah, I mean, sometimes things can be deceiving, but I think the human intuition is there for a reason. It's a developed sense that if you pay attention to it, gets stronger and stronger. And I think more people should trust it. That being said, I'm not sure what the human consciousness is capable of after the physical body dies. What I do know is when you're able to contact these people, they can interact with you and interact with your equipment and whatever essence of them is left. Now, that's not always the case, though. Although it's hard to decipher in the paranormal world because you're trying to explain something that is still pretty unexplainable, we generally separate it into two types of hauntings. So you have the intelligent hauntings and the residual hauntings. The intelligent hauntings are the ones that I've described where you can interact, make contact with the spirit. They can answer your questions. They can manipulate your equipment. They can even at points have physical contact with you. The residual spirits are something that is aligned with what is called the stone tape theory. So that's basically the idea that a moment or something that happened over and over in a place had such an effect on it that it's been imprinted in the location. So we have examples of that in the hotel as well. If you hear the same sound in a specific place over and over, or if you're able to see a physical apparition, but it is unable to interact with you or anything like that, that is considered residual haunting.
Stoned tape theory?
The stone tape theory.
This is the first I've heard of this. We're going to dive into this right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know. This is the AI answer. It says the stone tape theory. I've heard of the stoned ape theory. So I thought that's what you said.
No.
But it says is a pseudoscientific claim that ghosts and hauntings occur when historical information is released from rocks and other items. According to this theory, certain materials like stone can store recordings of historical events, which then can be played back as paranormal activities. This is fun.
Yeah.
So like hard drives.
Yeah.
Blow my mind.
Well, anything. It's why, when you see psychics sometimes asked to hold a physical item of the person they're trying to contact, is the idea that it holds energy from the person.
Right. That is so cool. So and the reason hard drives blow my mind, like they're made of like crystals or something. Like that's where data's stored.
Yeah.
How the hell does this happen?
Yeah, I know. It's so fascinating. And that's why there's also, when you really get deep into it, why certain people have affinities for learning about crystals and different types of organic material. It's why, the Appalachian mountains are considered to hold such memories because they're so old and it's holding that actually physically in the mountains. But the idea is that, especially in haunted locations or locations like the Blennerhassett Hotel, which have that older structure and have the same building material, that it can actually release former things that have happened or past memories. So the shadow figure hub down in the laundry room that I told you about, where that staircase is boarded up, common occurrence that we have up in the lobby, which is now an employee closet, but it used to be the top of that staircase, is seeing somebody, a woman, holding linens walking into that closet, but she's never been able to have interaction. She doesn't disappear when you try to contact her. She won't respond to anything. And it's never anything different. It just is like a tape, like a recording.
This is fabulous. So I'm on Wikipedia. Take that for what it's worth. But
love you, Wikipedia.
Yeah. It says the idea that environmental elements are capable of storing traces of human thoughts or emotions was introduced by multiple 19th century scholars and philosophers as an attempt to provide natural explanations for supernatural phenomena. In 1837, the polymath Charles Babbage published a work on natural theology called the Ninth Bridgewater Treatise. Babbage speculated that spoken words leave permanent impressions in the air, even though they become inaudible after a time. He suggested that it is possible due to the transfer of motion between particles. I mean, why not? We built a bomb.
Right?
Like, we build stuff.
Yeah.
Why can't this be true too?
Yeah. And the emotional concept of it too, like humans being conscious of their own mortality and, you know, the way our creativity works and the religions and the things that we're able to write and draw and all of these things. You know, I believe in the stone tape theory because when you sit down and you do really sit there and focus on the object, sometimes you can get things from it. And you know, people could say, oh, well, you're just convincing yourself of that. That's still pretty cool to me. It's the same way that the, what do they call it when you're placebo?
Oh, yeah. I love placebos.
See, because everyone is so.
It's like, it works.
See, that's my point, though. Everyone's so quick to be like, oh, it's a placebo effect. I'm like, so you mean my mind physically convinced me that what I thought was happening is true and I'm having physical effects. Okay, sounds pretty paranormal to me. But
right. I know, right? Yeah, like, okay, yeah, maybe that gets us in trouble every now and then, but for ghosts, it's fun.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no kidding.
But, yeah, I love that. Do you ever, like, just say, you know what? I'm going to go hang out at this graveyard?
All the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Oh, I mean, I've been doing that since I was a kid again. But, you know, they used to do that in the Victorian ages anyway. But I think the Victorians were a lot more open and adaptable to mortality and death because they had to deal with it so much more than we do today with modern medicine and whatnot. It was actually a thing in the Victorian era to go just have picnics in the cemetery and, you know, cohabitate with the dead. But I have had some interesting experiences, of course, in different cemeteries. There is one that I frequent in Parkersburg, and it is called the Lewis Cemetery. It's right outside the abandoned Lock and Dam number 19. So you can find that.
I'm going to find it.
It'll be, you might want to look up Lock and Dam 19.
How do you spell that?
So it's just Lock and Dam. Like
Lock and Dam
19.
19.
Yeah.
Sounds like I just broke my toe or something.
Parkersburg.
Lock and Dam 19 Parkersburg.
Yeah, there it is on Atlas Obscura. But there's a cemetery right outside of that location from the Lewis and Neal families that whole Lock and Dam in general, I was just there yesterday. That is a place that has a strong energetic imprint. I don't know if it's so close to Blennerhassett Island or right on the river or what it is. It's worth noting as well when people had less decorum about the Native Americans that mound dirt was used to fill that Lock and Dam. But the Blennerhassets were associated with that. And the Neals are actually Stonewall Jackson's mom's family. So I've had instances, I go to hang out there quite a bit. And in the Lewis Cemetery, I've had instances where I will be running a spirit box and then just reading out loud something. It's L-E-W.
L-E-W.
Yeah.
Okay. I was spelling the St. Louis version.
Yeah.
Lewis Cemetery?
Yeah.
All right. I know how to spell. There we go.
Yeah, Old Lewis Neal Cemetery. There it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Of course, no photos.
No photos. Okay. Let's
I
see
can
if I
send
can
you
go to...
one later on anyway.
Yeah, is this it?
No, it's a lot smaller.
Smaller?
It's yeah, I mean I could send it to you.
Washington, West Virginia?
Yeah, that's it. That's
Is this
it there.
it?
Yeah, and then
Okay.
you can see the old Lockmaster's house in the background, which is also super haunted. So I've had instances, I spend a lot of time out there. And, you know, I'm into urban exploring as well.
So I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out, I want to start doing abandoned property videos.
Sounds cool.
Will you be my co-host?
For sure. Yeah.
Okay.
sounds like the best time ever.
I mean, you'll get paid
Yeah.
because I have a camera guy. I'm going to get with you after this. We're going to figure this out.
Yeah. Oh, I love to do that. That's another co-hobby of mine. It just all kind of blends into each other. But that house right behind there in the Lock and Dam, absolutely somewhere you'd want to go first. So
Yeah.
that's my requirement. We got to go there.
Yeah. Okay. So the first video. So I'm thinking we'll do compilations. Like we'll go up, and then maybe I'll do little individual segments. But
Yeah.
like we go to Parkersburg, and you pick like 3 or 4 buildings.
Yeah,
And we
sounds
just
fun to me.
go around for like a 12-hour shift.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. And there's plenty of it, honestly. But I was going initially because I also write for Atlas Obscura freelance.
Oh,
so
cool.
I try to go, like if I'm in a place, I try and just hit all the spots on the list. And so this was on Atlas Obscura. I did not put it on there, but I wanted to go check it out. Simply as an urban exploring thing. And when I got out of the car that first time, it felt like I got hit in the chest. I mean, the spiritual energy there is insane. I don't know why it's still so haunted, but you can get activity there that is just unheard of most places. And I mean, there's stuff like that Lockmaster's house in the background. When you walk into it, not only is there very obviously a presence there, it looks like somebody just left. There's still, furniture and wallpaper and all that. The lock and dam itself is still pretty cool as well. You can see the old railroad tracks just there. And I'll tell you, that is a location I go to hang out quite a bit, and it's never boring. If I'm really not getting anything, I'll take a historical book from the area or something and just start reading about the area, and that usually conjures things up. I will say in this location, though, I've been accused of being a witch by a ghost that's talking to me.
Awesome.
I'm like, you're the one talking to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm in trouble, so are you.
That's great. Yes, we're gonna figure this out.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great spot.
Yeah. What else? What other spots are in Parkersburg? Okay, so we're going there. Where else we go?
Yeah. Oh, let me think. Okay, so this isn't in Parkersburg, and we're probably gonna have to get permission because I did not the first time, but I know that you can.
Okay.
There's an abandoned high school in, I'm gonna butcher this, Caro, West Virginia.
How do you think? Caro?
Like Egypt. Yeah. No
Uh,
I. So there's an I.
Cario.
No, it's before the R.
Oh, I'm doing
This is
really
so
terrible.
embarrassing too, 'cause I'm going to Egypt this year, so I better get it together before that. West Virginia, abandoned high school.
Abandoned high school. This sounds
That's
perfect
a cool
because
one.
I want to find some that
There
are
it
kind of
is.
big and have a
Yeah.
lot going on, and we could potentially fall through the floor.
Yeah, you definitely could. There's still just to add a little razzle dazzle.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an awesome location, and it really is eerie. I didn't pick up on any spirits when I visited. Doesn't mean they're not there, but it's so cool because it's just on top of this hill, and it, like similar to Trans-Allegheny, it's just a dominating building. And you go in there, and they've still got school chairs turned over, desks, and the like. So that's another definitely cool location in a very small rural Appalachian town.
Is that pretty close to the other one?
Oh, it's like 30 minutes away.
That's
from
plenty. Yeah.
Parkersburg.
So we do that.
Yeah.
We do the cemetery and then the building, the Lock and 19.
Yeah. So the Lockmaster's house and the Lock and Dam are 2 separate buildings.
Oh, okay. So that's
Yeah.
4. Okay. We need
Yeah.
one more. What do you think?
Oh, I'm gonna have to think. I'm not sure. I would say maybe somewhere out on North Bend. I'm not too sure out the gate exactly where, but the North Bend Rail Trail has a lot going on
Really?
there as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So, tunnel number 19, there might be something on top of that. So, tunnel number 19, the Silver Run Tunnel, is one of the most famous ghost stories in West Virginia, anyways.
Is this it?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
it right there. So there was an instance, the B&O Railroad used to have a station right on 6th Street in Parkersburg, very close to the hotel. And it was super popular during the hike, carrying thousands of people. And when people would be going through this tunnel, they started having a similar experience, all the nighttime engineers, where they would see this woman in the middle of the track. And they described her as just like young, dark hair, white dress. And they would freak out because you can't stop a train immediately. And they would, assume to have run her over and then stop the train, and there's nothing, no one there. So rumor starts going around that there's a ghost, of course.
Awesome.
Yeah. So there's always one. There was this engineer, O'Flannery, and he started talking all this mess. If I see her on the tracks, I'm not stopping. I'm going to run her over. Well, soon enough, he manifested that. He saw her and he didn't stop. But when he got to Parkersburg, to that B&O railway station, there was 100 people waiting for him because there'd been telegraphs and calls the whole way there that a lady had been riding on the front of the cow catcher there. And people actually saw her when he disembarked at the railway station. But it all came together later on because on top of that tunnel, as if it's not haunted enough, there is a very old cemetery that's still there. It's not very well maintained, but it is still there. And they went to, there's a few old structures that are still there as well. They went to demolish a cabin up there that was right by the graveyard. And when they did that, they actually found a female skeleton in that cabin in the same type of white dress, just right on top of there. So with that actual cabin having been demolished, I think maybe a few of the other buildings out there would have something.
Heck yeah.
But there's all sorts of activity that happens out there.
We're there. Stay tuned, y'all.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about this with the cameras off.
Sounds good.
Yeah, this is going to be great.
I'm excited.
So thank you for being here. This has been one of my funnest episodes that I've enjoyed. So
you.
Tell people, how can they get a hold of you? How can they plan their tour? How can, you read their minds, or like what all can they do?
Well, I'd rather not read your mind if I didn't have to. So I'm not
Gotcha.
going to give any advice on that. But yeah, so you can just contact the Blennerhassett Hotel directly. That's usually a good way to get a hold of me, or through Haunted Parkersburg if you contact Miss Scarlett Shepherd. She's a good friend of mine. Through the M45 Facebook page or Instagram page, TikTok. I'm directly through there. So yeah, just shoot me an email. I don't do personal residences or anything like that. But I'm all over. I'm all over the place. Where I used to live in New Zealand, I'll frequent there. Paranormal tourism is picking up there as well. I'll be in England this summer as well, and just kind of anywhere. So if you want to keep up, you never know where I might be.
That's freaking awesome. Well, Adra, thanks for joining us today. Everyone else, be sure to like this video, subscribe to Creepalachia on YouTube, find us on TikTok and Facebook. We have a growing community there. If you're listening to the audio-only version, be sure to take a minute or two and leave a review. Tell us what you think, and I appreciate you listening. And above all else, everyone, please remember, long live Appalachia.